for those of you who have spouses, you probably know that the word renowned visionary doesn't really go over well. Like, you know, it's sort of like you're an average husband. So, but I wanted to make this more of an interactive session, because what I think we really want to talk about here is how we actually translate all this fantastic work and research and effort and actually convert it into real dollars to the bottom line, right? I mean, I think that, you know, this whole summit and my work at SunEdison was really around that. I mean, when we started SunEdison, we really believed that solar was the future, right? We didn't believe that it was an interesting toy or that it was a small niche application or whatnot. We actually believed it was the future. And I think if you talk to customers of SunEdison like Whole Foods or Walmart or others, what they'll tell you is that in the first year that they signed the contract, it was maybe a 1% to 5% savings. But in fact, because utility prices have skyrocketed from when they signed those contracts, they're saving 20 to 30% on their electricity because they locked in their prices with solar. And that's not something that they can easily do with other fuel sources, because the sun is free and maintenance is low on that. And so the asset class and the way in which that asset class looks ended up being something that lent itself to that type of financing. Today, CPS Energy is, you know, one of the leaders here in San Antonio in deploying solar, and actually I think they've got a 13.8 megawatt solar system going in, and people said, well, why are you doing this? Why can't you do it this way? And, you know, it's funny how short memories are, you know? I mean, when nuclear power was built in the 1970s, it was really expensive. I don't know if many of you remember, but, you know, CPS Energy actually almost went bankrupt because their nuclear power plant was 200% over budget. But they paid off the bonds, they got all the CapEx paid off, and now nuclear power is the cheapest stuff out there, right? 1.7 cents a kilowatt hour. Everybody wants nuclear power. Well, the same thing's true for solar and wind and biomass and other things, in that if you don't have an expensive fuel price, then what ends up happening is once the CapEx gets paid off, it's deflationary, right? So in fact, it actually reduces electricity rates. Solar is 0.7 cents a kilowatt hour on a variable cost basis. Wind is less than 1.2 cents a kilowatt hour on a variable cost basis. So a lot of what I'm here to talk to you about today is how we actually think about things in a different way. The Carbon War Room, which Michael so eloquently talked about, was really started by Sir Richard Branson, and he was joined by several other billionaires and high net worth individuals on 4 continents, because they believe, and I believe, that what we're talking about here is the largest wealth creation opportunity of our generation. We're not talking about something that's interesting. It's a risk mitigation tool. It's a way for you guys to meet shareholder expectations on your sustainability things. We're really talking about the entrepreneurs of the future, right? In the 90s, people made money on web and that kind of stuff, and people are still making, you know, apps for the iPhone and making a lot of money at that. And then in the last decade, people made money on cell phone technologies, right? One of our founders is Strive, who owns Econet Wireless, who is, you know, one of the largest cell phone providers in 13 countries in Africa. Today, he was telling me how one of the big problems in Africa is that, or in Zimbabwe, where he's from, is that people have to, you know, when they want to go to the city, they actually have to, you know, get to the main highway, which might be 30 to 40 kilometers away, and they don't want to miss the bus, so they get there 2 days early, and they wait on the side of the road for 2 days to wait for the bus. He figured out a way with a $3,000 investment on his side to use SMS to actually, you know, tell those people 7 hours in advance when the bus was coming, so they could actually make it there within plus or minus 2 hours to save them time. Those people now generate more revenue for themselves and their families, which they use to actually spend money on to, you know, buy more food, buy more things that all of us actually, you know, respect, because they are a huge marketplace. You know, that same program in San Antonio or Washington, D.C. costs $50 million to deploy, because you've got GPS tracking units in every bus, you've got a central station, you know, system where they collect all the data and figure out how to do this, et cetera. So what we're talking about here is not something that's sacrifice. It's something that's hugely wealth creating, but it's something that's going to require us to think differently. For many of you who actually own buildings or operate buildings, things like ice storage. How many people know that DFW Airport doesn't have air conditioning but uses ice storage? So, you know, DFW Airport uses wind energy and, you know, coal and other things off-peak to make ice at night, and then it blows air over the ice and actually cools DFW Airport with ice storage. That eliminates the peak demand for that particular building and saves them a ton on demand charges, as well as figures out a way to actually reduce the amount of peaker plants that their utility has to buy to actually meet summertime peak. That's a far cheaper way of doing things than building a peaker plant that runs 7% of the time. You know, I think that, so what we're talking about, how many people know about desiccant cooling, where you take you know, the return air out of your building that comes in at 120 degrees and actually reduce it down to 70 degrees before it comes back into the building? You guys looked at that? 2-year payback? How many people have done it? 3, 4. So, you know, a lot of these things are hugely wealth creating. So people say to me, well, but Jigar, you know, I go to my CFO and my CFO says to me, Jigar, we only have this much CapEx for our budgets, and so, you know, I don't care whether it's a 1-year payback. I just can't use it because it doesn't fit into the CapEx budget. Well, that's what we did at SunEdison, right? I mean, for Walmart, I remember Whole Foods was our first client, and they said to me, Jigar, you know, for the cost of that solar system, I can build a new store. You know, they were growing like leaps and bounds at the time. Their stock price was skyrocketing. They weren't going to spend that CapEx on a solar system. Even if they had it, they weren't going to spend it on it. And so what we did was we figured out a way to own it off balance sheet. They just paid for the power over the next 20 years. And they, you know, decided to do it on as many stores as made financial sense for them across the country. The same thing's true for your desiccant cooling. The same thing's true for ice storage. The same thing's true for energy efficient windows. The same thing's true for high efficiency air conditioning, et cetera. Shifting things from the CapEx budget to the operating budget is something CFOs love to see, you know, and it makes us eat what we kill, right? I mean, for those of us in the service business, if we're not providing you good service, you don't pay. And so we actually have to provide good service. We have to provide uptime. We have to provide these things. Jim Hunt's in the audience there from the city of Boston, and we've been talking about advanced financing mechanisms for energy efficiency, whether it be property assessed clean energy bonds in the US, and we're working actually with governments in Europe as well as in India and other places on this design as well, or whether it be with utilities and, you know, working on utility on-bill payment mechanisms that Gainesville, Florida is looking at doing, and folks in Oregon at Portland Electric are looking to doing, et cetera. So to me, this is about wealth creation, but it's about problem solving. For many of us, you know, we've sort of been stuck looking at this problem and saying, you know, I talked to Johnson & Johnson, and Johnson & Johnson has a $50 million budget for clean technologies, and so, gosh, why can't I get a $50 million budget for clean technologies? Well, my guess is for many of you, you're not going to get that. So, you know, like instead of actually wishing and praying for something that's not going to happen, how do you work together to create revenue? How do you work together to create things on the bottom line? You know, for many of you, you know firsthand about the financial crisis. And, you know, how many of you know what percentage of loans to the wind and solar industry went into default? 0. Right? 0. So when Royal Bank of Scotland actually was taken over by the Bank of England, the most prized possession on their balance sheet was their wind portfolio, their wind loans. Right? They were able to sell those at par, 100 cents on the dollar. Right? That's a big deal. You know, if you're running a bank, why wouldn't you actually invest in that as opposed to other assets that were selling at 30 cents on the dollar? Right? I mean, you've got real data now that shows that at the time at which you have a financial crisis, these loans are worth a lot more than the other loans. So what causes people not to do this? You know, I mean, all of you are really smart people in the room. I think it doesn't benefit us in the conversation that we're having to throw aspersions on people. Well, that guy's a Neanderthal, and so, you know, he doesn't want to finance my stuff, or he won't sign a contract. This is about systems, and systems are not about logic. Right? So many of us think, oh gosh, if everybody was like Spock, you know, things would move a lot faster. First of all, they're not like Spock, and second of all, that's not the issue. Everybody is a product of their incentives. Right? So when CPS Energy locally was trying to build that nuclear plant, their incentives was, we don't want people to reduce energy consumption. We don't want people to self-generate their own power, because we need every single person buying that nuclear power when we build it, because otherwise we're going to have excess power. At the time at which that nuclear power plant dissolved because of other reasons, not for anything I did or other people did, they've now become the largest, solar city in Texas. They've surpassed Austin in 8 months, right? They've actually, invested a tremendous amount of money into energy efficiency and smart grid, and they've got the retrofit ramp-up money, from the Department of Energy, and they're moving very quickly. So this is not about logic and, oh, but Jigar, I've shown on a piece of paper that this is cheaper than this or whatever. This is about trying to figure out from a systemic point of view, what are people's incentives? Right? So people say to me, but Jigar, I have gone to my local banker, and my local banker told me that they will not give me a loan on energy efficiency. Well, why is that? How many people know bankers? Know their local bankers? A lot, right? And why do they actually invest in certain things and not others? So it used to be, people have seen It's a Wonderful Life, right? Where George Bailey is doing his thing and all those things. That doesn't exist anymore. Right? Today, when you make a loan, what happens is an insurance company calls you up and says, I want to buy that loan. I want to put that loan on my books, and I want to match that loan with this guy who bought a life insurance policy because it offsets it, and it allows me to actually, it's too arcane, but basically allows them to book more profits on their thing. That's how the world works. And so when a bank actually issues you a loan for your mortgage on your house, they immediately know how much they're going to sell it for to the next guy. And they know they're going to make $2,000 in profit for that. When they give you a loan for energy efficiency, how many people do you think are lined up to buy that loan from them? 0. Right? And so their problem is that they don't actually have a system by which they can actually give you that loan and then sell that loan on to somebody else so they can get the capital back so they can loan it out again. Right? So part of what the Carbon War Room is looking at is saying whether it be shipping or aviation or agriculture. I mean, some of the largest banks in the world, Robobank and an agro bank in China is going to go public here pretty soon, and one of the largest banks in the world, do agriculture. These guys provide liquidity to what you do. And it's not necessarily something you're going to get a PhD in, and I get that. But it's important for you to acknowledge that that's how the world of finance works today. Most people are transactionally oriented. They don't actually hold the paper that they're giving to you. They don't hold the loan that they're lending to you. They sell it to somebody else, get the money back, and make a profit on that. And so we've got to find out who's actually buying the paper, and if they're not buying the paper, why are they not buying the paper? So one of the things the Carbon War Room's doing is, everyone's talking about property assessed clean energy bonds and utility paper. We're saying to the insurance companies and the investment banks, who's buying the paper? Pension funds, others. Who's buying the paper? Why would you buy the paper? At what interest rate would you buy the paper? If you don't like it at 5.5%, would you buy it at 7.5%? Right? And then we're going to commercial building owners and saying to them, you don't want to put more loans on your books. Why don't you, what interest rate would you buy the paper at? And we're triangulating those 3 or 4 things together, figuring out how we actually make this work, which is exactly what we did in solar at SunEdison. Everyone says, oh, Jigar, that was so smart, whatever it was. It wasn't smart. Obviously, the PPA has been around for a long time. It's not like SunEdison solved the PPA. What we did was we figured out, how the entire chain worked. Who was going to buy it in the end? Today, there's so many people buying it that 75% of all new solar that gets installed is being installed on document sets that we helped to create. I mean, it was funny. I remember buying 6 companies when we were at SunEdison because they had fantastic pipelines. When we bought them, we were like, gosh, this contract looks familiar. It was like version 7 of our contract. They had figured out a way to do that. Why did they do that? They're not thieves. I mean, the reason they did that is because those were the contracts that they realized were actually able to be sold on to other banks. So that's, I think what we have to do is we have to realize that this is about wealth creation. We have to realize that this is a place where, unlike IT and unlike computers, which I bristle when people try to use those analogies, we're not in an empty space. It's not a greenfield space. I mean, computers didn't replace other things. They just were. They improved things. So it wasn't like you had this entrenched interest that you were trying to take down. Today, there are electricity providers. Today, you can actually get natural gas turbines that you generate for your own, particularly for people who have hospitals where they use a lot of heat. You can actually generate power at half the price of what the utility charges you if you self-generate power with natural gas. Today, you can do that with solar in many parts of the country. Today, you actually have a choice to leave the grid. At the time at which you do that, you are going to piss somebody off. So, it's not surprising that in San Antonio, for instance, it's not legal to do a PPA with with a building owner because they don't want you to do that, which is fine. But they're huge supporters of other programs. So we've got to be smarter. We've got to be more clever. We've got to work hard at figuring out how we actually reduce your liabilities and create wealth-creating opportunities as a part of it. Whether you're a city who desperately needs to put people back to work and see that energy waste and through energy efficiency programs is probably the easiest way to do that, or whether you're a building owner who says, we actually need to run our building more efficiently and prevent ourselves from an economic a negative situation when oil hits $147 a barrel again, or whether you're a real estate broker where you're looking at things and saying, what else do I do with my time? Right? Real estate people are the most amazingly flexible people I've ever met. In an up market, they're doing one thing. In a down market, they're doing something else. In a sideways market, they try to figure out another way to make money. These guys are super smart. They should be doing distributed generation. They should be doing energy efficiency. They should be doing other things, right? So part of my response to you is we have to be more thoughtful. We've got to move away from just talking about the opportunity and figuring out tactically how we actually mine the opportunity. And I would push you to push conference organizers and others to get us onto that topic, because I'm tired now of the topics of it's so much opportunity. Opportunity is a meaningless word for me. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm looking for wealth. So with that, that's my prepared talk. Any questions?
Hello, here you go.
Thank you. Daniel Wallach, Greensburg, Kansas. Really inspired by your words, your approach. I think that our bottleneck across the board in sustainability is messaging. So how we need an advertising marketing agency that does nothing but helps with language and messaging. Is that out there? I mean, is that part of what you all do?
It is part of what we're doing now. Part of what we're doing is we launched the concept of wealth creation in this area at the Carbon War Room on Earth Day, so 3 weeks ago. Today, I've already got 6 countries from around the world who are basically using the same lingo. We're setting up summits around the world on this, and I do think a lot of this is language. We've got to leave opportunity behind. And actually start speaking to investors. I think that there's this there's a lot of dividing lines, whether it be people that backed Carter or people who wanted Reagan and trickle-down economics and supply side this and whatever it is. But ultimately, let's be clear about what happened in the 1970s, right? In the 1970s, inflation was 9%. If you invested in stocks, you needed a 20% rate of return because capital gains was 50% at the time. Right, to just break even with inflation. Why would you invest in stocks, right? At the end of the day, we need investors. SunEdison needs investors to invest in this paper to be able to create jobs. That's what we need. So whether we're talking about what President Clinton did during his term, or whether Reagan did his thing, or this person did that thing, this is all about trying to figure out how you actually satisfy the needs of investors such that they are going to invest ungodly amounts of money into what it is that you guys want them to do and figure out a way for them to make money at doing that. And what they respond to is wealth creation. They don't respond to opportunity.
Sure. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with cities, how the Carbon War Room will interact with cities and what cities can do?
Sure. Well, so for some of you who know me, I don't generally tend to mince words. What we work on is that there's three parties to this transaction, right? The first party are the banks. The second party is the cities, and the third party are the vendors, right? And then there's fourth and fifth parties around auditing and commissioning and all sorts of other cool stuff. But ultimately, there are these 3 vendors. The people who matter right now are the banks. Right, there's $1 trillion worth of cost-effective energy efficiency you can do in cities, probably $3 trillion actually, and the cities want that stuff to be mined as soon as possible because it'd create jobs and actually get us out of the funk that a lot of folks are in. The banks have certain things. For instance, it hasn't been adjudicated around property assessed clean energy bonds, whether it's truly ahead of the mortgage or whether it's not. So the banks want 8% interest financing. They don't want to give it to you at 5.5%, because if ultimately the courts rule against them and decide that the mortgages actually take precedent over their loans, they're going to lose that part of their portfolio in a bankruptcy or foreclosure situation. So it's at 8%. Who cares? I don't know, and so we've gone to cities and said to them, look, here are the rules and regulations by which these guys are going to give you money, right? They're going to give you money based on underwriting standards. They don't want to do a lot of residential. They want to do some residential. They want to do multifamily housing, but they don't want to do a lot of residential homes at $10,000 a piece. Are you okay with that? Is your mayor okay with that, right? Residential people vote. How do we work on this, right? They want to do a lot more commercial because they can. On top of that, so the third party is vendors. They want to work with vendors who actually are going to guarantee their work. They don't want to deal with insulation, for instance, where you upgrade a building, the contractor screws up, and everyone's finger pointing and figuring out, like, well, who's to blame for the fact that you're not actually saving money? These banks want the underwriting standards to be at $1.50 of savings for every dollar of property tax. That leaves solar on the ground. They don't want to finance solar because, that's why Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac came out against PACE recently, but they left a lot of holes as to how they could be brought back on board, because they want people to save money on this. They don't want to make the total revenues under the PACE model to be increased to the monthly payments. So a lot of what we're doing with cities is having a frank discussion with them about what the banks want, what the vendors want, and what the cities can do to actually facilitate this. I think a lot of cities, for one reason or another, think they're in the driver's seat on this thing, and we're going to cities and saying, you are a conduit to actually making this happen, but you're not in the driver's seat today. 5 years from now, you might be, because there'll be tons of money flowing around, and then you'll be the princess at the ball, and the princess will get to choose who they want to court. But today, you've got a whole bunch of banks that we're trying to cajole to get into this space, and how do we actually make you look attractive enough for them to actually care? And so that's what we're working on with cities. And we've got a pretty tough love message.
Do we have any other questions over here in the front of the room? No? Well, I guess one more over here.
Jigar Shah, Alliance Health System in Minneapolis. I like your message about simplifying solar as a service. In terms of what we do with the sustainable efforts right now, can you kind of apply the model in terms of simplifying sustainability into a commodity that we all can embrace, rather than the complexity that we are facing now in terms of all the layering of certification that we have to go through?
It's a great question. I think that we're in a situation where we have a number of people who make a lot of money through complication. Right? If you're a sustainability executive and you call somebody, they say, well, you know what? We're going to put a really custom report for you because you're in the healthcare business, and that's a tough business. Like that is not like the car business at all. We need to try to figure out a way to customize this thing exactly for you. Now, do we have to customize it? Of course. In the solar industry, water pumping, thin film is a lot better. Central station, utility scale stuff. There's different technologies from concentrating PV to others. There's, rooftop systems. You want to do crystalline solar because it's, the most dense, and so people want to maximize their roof and get the most stuff. But what do we say? We say to the customer, it's 12 cents a kilowatt hour, 25-year contract. Do you want to sign up to that? You should be agnostic as to whether it's thin film or crystalline or central station CPV or whatever it is. That's not your business. And I know a lot of you guys are in the facility management industry or whatnot, and so you're like, well, no, it is my business. I've got to deal with this. I've got to deal with that. But that's not true. I mean, today HP actually creates this pod, right? The HP pod for data centers, where literally the whole thing is self-cooled, the whole 9 yards, and all you're doing is buying bits per second. And the whole thing is taken care of by them. They actually have bought $1 trillion worth of, of gas for the next 20 years and actually locked in the price. So they're even taking care of that for you. And they're going to do a, microturbine or whatever it is, and they basically use absorption cooling. And so there are companies that are willing to do this, but you've got to let go. You know, I mean, and it's not going to put you out of a job. I think there's a lot of people who are like, but Jigar, you know, like if all this stuff becomes simple, then why does my CEO need me? Well, the CEO needs you because we are in a time of unprecedented change. Unprecedented change, right? I mean, if you think that this is bad, think about it. I mean, like I never even heard of Twitter, right? Like a year and a half ago, Twitter comes on the scene, and you know, quickly, this U.S. State Department, right? You know, largely something that people consider slow and stodgy or whatnot. The U.S. State Department uses Twitter to figure out how to like work in Iran, right? Last week or last month or whatever it was, Facebook became the most popular page on the internet. This stuff is moving so fast that there is no way that your CEO is going to be able to keep up with this. So you will always have a job. You will always have a job, right? But what you don't have is the comfort level right now within the CFO and all the other folks to do these kinds of contracts. Solar is easy because it's simple, it goes on the roof, it's sort of like segmented. A lot of these other things are integrated with your buildings. But I've talked to CB Richard Ellis. CB Richard Ellis wants to provide this service to you. Right? They actually want, if they own your building, or lease your building or whatever it is that they do, they're willing to provide you a complete management system where you use people like Pulse Energy or Zero Point Energy or let's see, Scientific Conservation International. These guys all take the data out of your building automation system like Johnson Controls or Honeywell or that kind of stuff. And they actually use, there's over 12 companies that I know about, and there must be 40 other ones, that take that data and actually provide an algorithm to it and give you a detailed report on a literally weekly basis on how well your building's doing and how you can manage the set points to actually reduce your energy consumption by 10 and 20%. This stuff is easy. And I don't mean to like say, oh, that Jigar, he just, talks in hyperboles and whatever else. This really is easy. I mean, there are companies who've literally spent 25 years in this sector doing energy efficiency retrofits. There is not a single thing that they have not, that they are scared or surprised by. They know how to do this. And they do have a responsibility to explain to you what they're doing to your building, because your buildings are, your property or your responsibility, and they have a responsibility to do that. But to suggest that you can't simplify this is incorrect. You can simplify this. And there are lots of people from to go back in and actually simplify this for you and finance it for you and other things. So I do think that, I had a long conversation with somebody the other day who said to me, but Jigar, okay, I get that. How do I start? Just put it on your website. Put it on your website. An RFP from, Allina Health Systems. Basically, we want to talk to people that are going to reduce our energy consumption by 30%. And we are looking to sign unique and interesting contracts that are willing to do this. We have, your proposal can be no longer than 1 page because we don't want to read that much, right? And we're going to pick the top 4 people to come in, and we will sign a contract by July. It has to be no money down. It has to be service. It has to be you guys take full responsibility with performance bonding or whatever it is that you actually put in your contract. I would recommend against it because I think you want the smaller companies to participate, but it's your choice. And you basically put your proposal up there and you do it. I talked to this manufacturer of kayaks. He's the largest manufacturer of kayaks in the world, Jackson Kayaks out of Tennessee. And he was saying to me, Jigar, we are a sustainable company and but we're a manufacturer and we can't do this. I was like, just put it on your website, biofuels, whatever, because he said, we had a really hard time financially when the oil prices went up because we have so much embedded energy in our manufacturing processes. And this is a common thing. I'm from Sterling, Illinois, which is close to Rockford, Illinois, which is, unfortunately a place that has lost industrial output every single year for 30 years. And they say, well, Jigar, it's just because manufacturing's down in China. That's not true. The reason it hasn't been successful is because we continue to think that for whatever reason, that things were better in the 1960s than they are today. I mean, everything is better today than they were in the 1960s. Our access to healthcare, the quality of our vehicles, the ability for us to actually produce energy from cleaner sources. I can keep my lawn greener than I could keep it in 1960 because Scott's has some weird thing that they're selling me now. I mean, there's tons of things that are more interesting. But what happens is that we look at things and we say, last year, this stock went up 30% in my portfolio. Well, based on that, would you actually take all the rest of your portfolio, sell it all, put it into that stock for the next 20 years? Hell no. You'd say, well, what's going on for the next 20 years? Like, is this stock well positioned? Are they going to be good in their industry? But that's exactly what we do for our infrastructure, right? Somebody comes to me and says, well, nuclear power is 1.7 cents a kilowatt hour. I love this stuff. And I'm a huge pro-nuclear guy, right? But, it's coming in at $7 billion or $8 billion for a 1,000 megawatt plant. That's not cheap. Just because it's cheap now doesn't mean that the next 20 years I should lock us into these ridiculous contracts and these ridiculous things. The same thing happens with building folks. I hear from people all the time like, but Jigar, I don't know if I want to go to the next generation of this or the next generation of that or whatnot. It's like, what are you talking about, next generation of this? You're going to be out of a job 5 years from now when energy prices go up and you guys basically, set up your company on technology from 20 years ago, and then like the CEO is like, crap, we're going to retrofit all our buildings with $200 million worth of CapEx just to stay on track. That's ridiculous. All this technology is there. It's been proven. Put an RFP on your website. Just put it out. Or if you're not comfortable with an RFP, put an RFQ on your website. And just to say, we're doing a request for qualifications. Here's what we're looking for. We want the smartest people in the world to come talk to us. Make it one page so we can read it. I guarantee you'll have 20 applications the next day. Any other questions?
Any other questions?
A lot of your conversation has been about corporations and cities and things like that. Just some sort of random thoughts, if you will, on changing the conversation at universities.
That's a very interesting question. So how many people have kids at universities? How many people like the fact that your tuition's gone up 3 times the level of inflation or 7 times the level of inflation? I don't really understand universities. It's one of those things where I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. The University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign is powered by a coal plant, like many universities, land-grant universities, 30-megawatt coal plant. They've got district heating underneath the university campus, right? Amazing, right? How many people actually have district heating? It's really expensive to retrofit a place for district heating, but they already have it. I went back there the other day and I asked them, well, what are you doing? What interesting research are you doing and all this other stuff? They said, well, we're not touching that coal plant. What are you talking about? The University of Illinois is probably one of the preeminent universities in the world at agricultural sciences, right, and other things. There's all these technologies where you actually can co-fire coal plants with biomass, right? Waste biomass and all these other things. What are you doing? Well, Jigar, I don't know. We got a bunch of students who said that they wanted to pay for RECs, and so we added a $4 fee to everybody's bill, and we're buying renewable energy credits to show that we're 100% green. It's like, are you kidding me? Honestly, the next generation of our youth are coming out of this university. They are 100 times smarter than I'll ever be, right? Because they learn at such a fast pace because they're used to the internet and they're used to all these things that didn't exist when I was going to school. And so you got the smartest people, and you're not willing to engage them in a competition to figure out a way to reduce energy costs at the school. And they do, for instance, there's this technology, Big Belly Solar. Have you seen this thing out of Massachusetts? Amazing, right? This thing basically sits there and it sends you a radio signal to tell you when it's full. Every university has hundreds of garbage cans around the thing. You stick this thing in, it reduces the amount of pickups for garbage, and it compacts down the thing with solar power at 5-to-1 ratio. It reduces the amount of pickups by 75%. It saves you a ton of money. They're like, well, the unions aren't going to like this because they actually pick up stuff. That's ridiculous. I've talked to the unions. They're not against that. In fact, they think they're so overworked right now on the trash side that if they actually could alleviate their time on this stuff, they could do more value-added stuff on the other side. They could help you on recycling. They could help you on some of these other things in waste. But, I find the universities, they're the first to sign these pledges for zero emission carbon by 2020, or, we're going to do this other thing. But they are the last ones to implement these technologies on a massive scale. You think about how many buildings most universities have. They are prime for somebody like Johnson Controls or even these, these startup companies to come in. You should do the same RFQ. But instead of doing the RFQ with private companies, do it with your students. Do an RFQ with your students and tell your students, look, I want you to do an independent study. I want you to tell us how we're going to actually, they have these new technologies where they can make oil from plastic, from recycled plastic. They have this new technology where they can actually use plasma to, for waste to energy facilities, to actually create, oil and byproducts for transportation. Just amazing stuff is happening, like absolutely amazing. And when you talk to the university professors, they're like the leading people in their field at doing this, but the implementation isn't there. I think the universities have to stop with the whole we're really proactive, we're really progressive, we're really doing this stuff, but we need to see this stuff tested before we're going to do this. I mean, if the universities can't test this stuff, I don't know who else can. And the stuff I'm talking about has all been tested other places. So I think universities are the prime place to do this, and I think a lot of this comes down to just calling their bluff and calling BS. I think that's, Harvard and MIT are the worst, actually. The absolute worst in the whole area. They keep telling me how wonderful they are. They've got this $1 million zero interest loan or something for this thing. That's it, right? Meanwhile, they lost 30% on their endowment, in buying derivatives. I was like, are you kidding me? Again, solar and wind didn't have one single default in the financial crisis. And you weren't smart enough to know that? That's really sad. So, any other questions?
Actually, unfortunately, Jigar, we're just out of time.
We're out of time.
Perfect ending. But again, thanks so much for joining us here. Excellent speech.
Thank you very much.